Want a quick 10-minute wrap-up of the week's compliance news? Well, this is the podcast for you, 10 for 10, where Tom Fox, the voice of compliance, wraps up 10 top compliance stories which occurred over the past week. If you don't know, Tom has a daily news podcast, appropriately called the Daily Compliance News, and 10 for 10 wraps up the week. So get up on a Saturday morning, have a great cup of coffee, and check out 10 for 10, the podcast which gives you the week's top compliance news. Are you interested in upping your game in compliance through the use of AI and machine learning technology? Well, check out my latest book, Upping Your Game, How Compliance and Risk Management Move to 2030 and Beyond. You can check it out in the show notes. I've got a link to the purchase at Amazon.com. Upping Your Game. 10 for 10 for the week ending September 13, 2025. Our first story comes to us from the Financial Times with Ryan McMorrow and Chen Ling reporting that Chinese authorities have detained a senior banker whose father was the former top securities regulator in China, who's also under investigation as part of the anti-corruption campaign, which is increasingly ensnaring family members of fallen officials. The son was a rising star at one of the country's leading investment banks. China International Capital Corporation is taken away by authorities. So the expansion of getting rid of people that are either corrupt or you don't like continues. Next from the New York Times, a couple of stories about Jeffrey Epstein. Yes, he of President Trump's favorite subject, Jeffrey Epstein. Well, the New York Times did an incredibly long and detailed reporting piece that found that J.P. Morgan, one of America's leading banks, spent years supporting and profiting from Jeffrey Epstein, ignoring red flags, suspicious activity, and concerned executives, that operations overrode compliance, and that Jess Staley, the now disgraced banker, was a very close friend of Epstein and shepherded him through the J.P. Morgan relationship for many years. So it's really a damning portrait of J.P. Morgan until they finally fessed up and turned over the information to the feds. Our second story about Epstein is about a woman named Catherine Ruemmler, who was listed as an alternative estate trustee in Epstein's will. At the time, she was a lawyer at Latham Watkins, and now she's the general counsel at Goldman Sachs. So she's obviously a big player, but the question is, why was she listed as a alternative trustee when Latham, he wasn't a client of the firm? So there must have been some type of professional relationship or other there to lead to that. So our next story comes to us from Bloomberg, which reports that Citibank and UBS have settled claims with the CFTC over compliance. Units were among several firms that agreed to pay a total of $8.3 million fines to settle claims by the CFTC over compliance-related violations, including record-keeping and reporting lapses. The penalties were part of an enforcement sprint initiative that the CFT acting chairman debuted back in March to encourage businesses under scrutiny from the agency to come up with reasonable offers to settle cases that did not involve market abuse or customer harm. It was a way for the CFTC to clear out its docket, perhaps get rid of cases that it no longer wanted to focus on, albeit very low-hanging fruit. It appears to have been wildly successful, and multiple firms, including these two, took advantage of it. As reported by Compliance Week, there were additional settlements with SMBC Capital Markets, Inc., Banco Santander, and Bank of New York Mellon. Each paid $500,000 to resolve record-keeping and supervision allegations. The firms used unapproved communications channels and engaged in exemplary cooperation with the CFTC. So it demonstrates that this administration is certainly willing to work under certain circumstances with firms who may have engaged in technical violations, yet these firms, or rather the enforcement agency, really doesn't want to bother with them anymore. So good set of lessons learned there. Next up, a burgeoning corruption story involving the National Basketball Association, Kawhi Leonard, Steve Ballmer, the owner of the LA Clippers, and a lot of other high-profile investors is Aspiration Partners. And the Clippers are accused of, or at least suggested that they and Ballmer have laundered money to Aspiration to avoid paying the salary cap by having monies paid to their star Kawhi Leonard come from Ballmer and or the Clippers. But there are a large number of Hollywood types, including Leonardo DiCaprio, Robert Downey Jr., and many others who are nursing hundreds of millions in losses as the company paid for, or the company went bankrupt after basically engaging in a Ponzi scheme. So was it fraud or was it something else? I guess we'll find out. Next up from Reuters, there's been a series of articles about the protests in Nepal, which brought down the prime minister. And basically we had Gen Z protests bringing down the prime minister in Nepal. When Nepal banned major social media platforms last week, activists took to the streets, and those streets became bloody, fire-laden, and violent. The succession comes 13 months after similar youth-led protests in nearby Bangladesh forced out the then prime minister as well. And I think people are getting sick and tired of corruption, and for reasons unknown, the youth are actually willing to do something about it, as opposed to older generations. Next up, from New York Times Deal Book, a wave of fake expense report receipts are being generated by AI. Really no surprise there, because people have been cheating on expense reports since expense reports were created. Yet, you have to use AI to determine if it's an AI-generated fake expense receipt. And so we have AI versus AI. For those old enough to remember Spy versus Spy in Mad Magazine, well, it seems to me that's what's going on here. But the problem is, of course, broken windows. And once you allow fake receipts to go through, people begin to see they can steal money from the company. They engage in greater and greater amounts and types of fraud, leading to bribery and corruption. From Forbes, Governance, Risk, and Compliance in Generative AI, Navigating the Challenges of Responsible AI Development. As companies move this forward, the integration presents a unique set of challenges. It has the potential to automate creativity, process, and innovation, but it raises complex questions. And so what are those questions, and what should you do going forward? And our final story comes to us today also from the New York Times, and that is that a Meta whistleblower who ran or was the head of security for the messaging app WhatsApp has accused the company of putting billions of users at risk. He claims that WhatsApp, or rather Meta, inadequately failed to address the hacking of more than 1,000 accounts, rejected his proposals for security fixes. But even more potentially dangerous is that Meta understood the danger that its WhatsApp was presenting for children and refused to study it further or do anything to ameliorate the danger to children. So it's going to be interesting to see how this plays out. This is Tom Fox again. 10 for 10 is a special production of the Compliance Podcast Network. I'd also urge you to check out the Daily Compliance News, which posts every week from Monday to Friday, where I give 4 curated stories of bribery, corruption, and compliance events that will allow you to help you start your day as well. So check out the Daily Compliance News and subscribe or rate and review to both 10 for 10 and the Daily Compliance News. Thanks so much for listening to this episode of 10 for 10. I hope you'll check out the newest podcast in the Compliance Podcast Network, the Compliance Tip of the Day. In Compliance Tip of the Day, I give a 5 to 8 minute summary of one tip that you can integrate into your compliance program or put together for greater compliance program efficiency. Finally, if you're a Sherlock Holmes fan, I am preparing a new season of Adventures in Compliance where I go through the 4 novels of Sherlock Holmes. Hear it on the Compliance Podcast Network.